Well, it's 12:01, so I want to respect everyone's time. We'll get started. I know we're going to have some more folks filter in. But before we get started with our webinar, Myron Tyrell, who is this year's vice chair, is going to share some history slides.
So as you know, we have had so much fun, Heidi and I, creating these Century of Change slides. And today we're going to cover the 1980s. So next slide, please. So from chapter history, we had two chapters that formed back then. Lockheed Martin Leadership Association in Fort Worth is at 83 years this year. And then Lockheed Martin Leadership Association Clearwater is celebrating their 10-year anniversary. Next. And as far as key events, the force that is known as Avis French joined NMA in 1983. It's also when Management Week in America started. And in 1988, as you'll probably hear later with our speaker, the speech contest was first held, so we had been going a few years before he competed. Next. So those trend lines are starting to edge up now. So when we get to the 1980s, we finally cross that mystical dollar per gallon mark. I don't know if you remember, but I think all the gas stations around here didn't have those spaces on their signs, and they had to put tape and paint up to have that $1 off to the edge of their signs. Milk trended down a little bit. Bread doubled. Campbell's tomato soup almost doubled. Housing really took a jump. And the stock market did too. So as you can see, things are all trending up in the 1980s. Next. For the politics and pop culture, we did have 3 different presidents during the 1980s, Carter, Reagan, and H.W. Bush. Some of the business leaders that we really enjoyed reading about, Robert Crandall with American Airlines, Michael Dell with Dell Computer, Steven Spielberg with DreamWorks, and Oprah Winfrey with Harpo Productions. So those were all of our key leaders that started in the 80s. On the book side, these are probably all ones that you have read. I know I remember them being in different business classes that I've taken. In Search of Excellence, Influence, The Psychology of Persuasion, The 1-Minute Manager, and Organizational Culture and Leadership. Next. Major events. See, but the easy thing to know about the savings and loan crisis, it's that little series of red when the amount of dollars invested in savings and loans went below where it should be. So you can see we've only had one other time in their history beyond that little blight in the 1980s. Everybody probably remembers the Iran-Contra affair with Ollie North there. So it was also the decade of fundraising, I would call it, for humanitarian causes. We had Band-Aid, Farm Aid, USA for Africa, and Hands Across America. And a shout out to Matt Zelman, because if he had been old enough to drive at this point, he probably would have been at all of the concerts. We also have the fall of the Berlin Wall occurred right toward the end of the 80s. Okay, next slide. So we had the first personal computers. Most of these are very large compared to what we would now have in our hands. I kept my original Macintosh for a long time, and it was basically just bookends on a bookshelf at the time because that's all it could do. Both of the major stealth planes started in the 1980s, although one didn't fly till the early 90s. We had the first space shuttle launch. And I remember as a kid going down to Kennedy, and they had these pictures of, we're going to have a rocket that flies like a plane. Nah, I was like, yeah, right, sure you are. Well, I did actually get to see a space shuttle launch. It was a cool thing. I'm glad I got to see that. And then, I know, love it or hate it, Microsoft Windows started in the 1980s. Next. So we are still begging chapters to participate in community service, and we know you're doing it. We just don't know it. So please reach out to Daryl or myself with information about your service projects that you're completing. We really want to show the impact that NMA has on its local areas. Next. And we are still planning on doing a time capsule. We have kind of heard crickets from the chapters, so we really want to hear some information if you are planning to participate. We will size the time capsule based on the pieces that are being donated, but if it's a document, we ask you try to keep it at 8.5 by 11. Things like chapter pins, like we trade at conference and all, those are good additions. But just reach out to Heidi if you have a question about something that you want to donate. That's all for me, Daryl. You're on mute.
Sorry about that. All right, now I'm going to have the privilege of introducing our speaker for today. Andrew Cooper is the head of patent acquisitions and monetization at the world's largest social media company, otherwise known as Meta, the parent company of Facebook. He oversees a diverse portfolio, including patent acquisitions, IP licensing, M&A and technology transactions, AI, and academic collaborations. Previously, he served as the Chief Intellectual Property Counsel at UPS, where he managed the company's IP portfolio, and is also as General Counsel of UPS Airlines. His best-selling book, The Ethical Imperative, published in 2024, explores the role of conscientious leadership in shaping business and society, and it was nominated for the 2024 Financial Times Business Book of the Year and won a 2025 Axiom Book Award in Business Ethics, and is taught at the New York University Stern School of Business. And a fun fact is that Andrew is a past participant in the NMA speech contest. There he is right there on the right-hand side of this picture. Back in 2004, he was a speech contest participant. So, Andrew, we appreciate your time today, and I will turn the sharing over to you.
Oh, thank you so much, and I appreciate that blast from the past. And I hope at some point you could send me that photograph. That's a great one. It's so good to be with you on your centennial, and I really appreciate your team reaching out and reconnecting. This is a great organization. It certainly has had an impact in my life. When I was an NMA speech contest finalist in the East region, United States, Gulfstream Aerospace was a sponsor, and that really made all the difference for me. So actually, as I heard this was a centennial celebration, I went back and did some research on just the organization's founding and reacquainted myself with Charles Kettering, the founder. As fate would have it, I live on Kettering Drive here in Roswell, Georgia. And I think, Daryl, you sent me something from Kettering, Ohio, or somewhere in Kettering in Ohio. So it's crazy, all the parallels. But this organization has its seeds more than 100 years ago. So about 117 years ago, there was a young mechanic who broke several bones in his face, and he eventually died from an infection there afterwards. And he got this injury from a mechanical failure while turning a hand crank, trying to help someone. So the mechanic's name was Byron Carter. And he was a friend of the Cadillac founder, Henry Leland. So what happened was Mr. Carter stopped to help a woman whose Cadillac had stalled. The engine kicked back, and the iron crank shattered his jaw. And as I mentioned, he died a few weeks later. So Leland vowed that the Cadillac car would kill no more men. And so he hired Charles Kettering, who was an engineer at Delco Labs, so the Dayton Engineering Labs company. And Mr. Kettering devised a safer electric starter, which was first introduced in the 1912 model. It revolutionized the industry standard. So as I was reading about Kettering, I thought it's such a great topic to talk about failure and preparation today, because his work from that one failure ultimately resulted in saving so many lives. And it's hard to conceive of a worse failure, mechanical or otherwise, than when someone dies. When I was working at UPS, as you mentioned, I was the GC of UPS Airline. My work during COVID, which really seeded the stories in the book, are stories that are about overcoming episodic failures in a crisis. I remember being at one of UPS's facilities, Pleasantdale, here in Atlanta, and we had seasonal workers there, and we were delivering vaccines all over the world. So if you've had a COVID vaccine from any clinic, hospital, or doctor's office, it was probably delivered by UPS Airlines. And at the time in the factory, there was a young man who walked behind one of our 18-wheeler feeders and was crushed to death. And, that one failure made us revolutionize our safety apparatus in the operation. And so as I discuss failure and preparation today and the good things that can come out of both of those things, we're really going to test one idea, and that's whether smart organizations learn faster when they treat failure as cartography. So let me start on this slide, the hidden costs of failing fast. In Silicon Valley, and I work for Mark Zuckerberg. I guess I should take a step back and describe what I do. So right now, I'm a patent lawyer by training. I've been in the intellectual property space for 14, 15 years now. And our team, there are two ways companies can grow. Many of you know this, inorganically and organically. Our team sits on the inorganic strategy, where we look at companies that have developed the technologies or technologies that are nascent. We evaluate them for our M&A team. We assist in diligence on M&A. We also work on tech transactions and so forth to acquire licenses and things like that to various technologies that are in the market today. So yes, been in the room with Mark. No, I will not answer any questions about him personally. But we have this thing called fail fast. We talk about it all the time in Silicon Valley. The research tells us a complicated story about what it means to fail. And I want to talk through some of the reasons why that story is a little complicated. Failure creates an emotional memory for all of us. And emotional memory is sticky. It's something that your body biologically has a strong reaction to. So negative outcomes, for example, they cause this physiological response. They light up in our brains, in the amygdala, a do not enter sign in our neural map. And these are really important for us as we're developing neural networks, and which are the basis for AI, because you want to understand how do people naturally react when something like failure triggers a response. So Elizabeth Phelps and Adam Anderson did some research that analyzed positron emission tomography. So these are imaging of the brain. And this is while participants viewed emotionally charged stimuli, so videos and pictures, things that would evoke a response. And by comparing the memory performance in patients who had amygdala damage versus those who were healthy, so your control group. And they observed kind of this heightened activation and successful recall from triggered emotional imagery. And that concluded, their research concluded that there's an emotional significance to triggering events like failure or violence that can enhance overall long-term storage of these events, but also creates this do not enter or do not repeat signal in the brain. This is good, right? This is good for us to know, because yes, if something happens, you want to know exactly what happened, but it can also paralyze from the strong reaction, from the strong trigger. And we see that often in organizations where a failure, a single event, results in a massive genuflection or overreaction, and the result is a failure to change, to move, to adapt, and to create new opportunities. So failure is a traumatic event. So that's one way in which there's kind of this murky water around how much we get from failure. And actually, as an aside, I'll say our company, like many companies around the world, are going through periods of downsizing. You may have to reorient groups. And losing a job is a very traumatic event. As you are analyzing how to orient your organization, we have to ensure that that layoffs and downsizing are never premised on a person's failing at a project or failing at a concept. Because if you are choosing, ways to decide where people go and how to downsize your organization, you want individuals who have pushed past failures, because that increases the organizational resiliency of your team. I was playing a game of Go Fish with my daughter, and it reminded me of the saying that you can do everything right and still not win, because I played a flawless game and she beat me. And the workplace is the same way. You can do everything right in a concept and it still not necessarily work out the way that you want it to. So just a food for thought for those organizations that are reorienting. Don't premise what could ultimately be a very catastrophic or evocative response from something like a layoff. Don't premise layoffs on those who have had some failures in the past, but have demonstrated resilience. There's a second point about failure that kind of makes things murky. Our reflection is somewhat uneven. So there was a landmark study by a guy named Sims Sitkin, and he built a model by analyzing kind of dozens of field cases on organizational errors, on accidents, on quality programs, very similar to the UPS incident at Pleasantdale that I mentioned, where someone had passed away. He kind of picked out those examples. And it's classic case study, kind of looking at the aftermath of events. And he contrasted catastrophic failures with small ones. So loss of death versus, we failed to consummate a contract. We couldn't execute a contract. And what he found is that those modest containable errors provoke diagnostic feedback. And they avoid defensiveness. So when we look at failure, generally, people tend to grade failures from very bad to little. And what we know is when something is minor, teams, organizations, managers tend to be more likely to dissect and think about and look through those issues, versus when something major happens, there's always this sense that there must be major consequences. And as a result, there's more defensiveness, people hide things, and that's where you get into real issues with the quality of programs. That's why you need auditors and so on. So there's this real disconnect between how our willingness to engage in reflection based on how big the failure is. And then the final kind of piece of this that makes the literature around failure and the dividends that come from it difficult to attain is that we are humans, and so we have ego involved in everything that we do. There's a scientist, his name's Fishbach, who did some experiments. This was back in earlier 2019, and he found that people often tune out after personal failure, and they absorb less after the fact. And this is personal, individual failure, not necessarily group or systemic failures. And so he looked at 5 labs, and they were these all labs doing field experiments. And the researchers gave their participants problem solving and workplace tasks. So they then randomly delivered success or failure feedback before a second attempt. So you've got these 5 different groups of people, they're all doing work, and you're giving them feedback at random. It had nothing to do with how well they performed. And follow-up tests and observations following up on the second attempt, they showed that those who received failure feedback improved less. They remembered the corrective information not so well, and they reported lower self-efficacy in their work. So we know that ego threat can block the very learning opportunities that failure is supposed to provide. So failure carries this dividend. We wouldn't say it in Silicon Valley that fail fast, but we can only convert that raw disappointment into a beneficial dividend through structured insight. So we have to be very clinical as organizational leaders in how we do that. So let's talk really quickly on this slide about how. This is a pretty dense slide. I'm going to go fast because there's a lot of information here. The first way you kind of get that dividend out is you have to vent and validate, which is to acknowledge that a setback occurred and let the team describe what happened in plain language. No blame, no spin, keep it short. We say capture first feel quotes. It should be something, like in a 10-minute huddle. This is in the first 24 hours, right? After the failure becomes self-evident, then you sit down. Because sometimes these things could subsurface for a while before the failure is laid bare. But as soon as it happens, this is the vent and validation time period. Then you want to move into a, frame review period where you schedule a structured after action report. The military, those who've been in the military know this very well. Military is well known for AARs, right? It's where you send kind of a 1-page guide with some prompts. What was supposed to happen? What actually happened? Why were there differences? What's the delta between the two? And what are we going to do next time? And military AAR show higher recall and team learning because the script keeps the discussion factual and future oriented. And the Army University Press has a really good article on this. The third, I moved too fast there on that slide. Yeah, the third piece is to mine the data. In Silicon Valley, we are always about data, being data informed about the things that we do. So bringing objective data like metrics, logs, user feedback, these are really important. You kind of map each failure point to a stage in your process flow. And this tagging forces you to abstract. It forces abstraction. It moves the mind from concrete pain to pattern spotting, which is a key step in reflective observation. You need to move from this, this hurt, we did something wrong, to I see how this fits in a bigger pattern of things happening. And now we can get to the root cause of the people, the process, the technology, whatever it is that resulted in the failure. The fourth is to generate a hypothesis. So now we're moving into a scientific approach. We're going to ask the team to draft 2 improvement ideas per root cause and use a premortem to figure out, hey, in a future state, let's talk about what this would look like and what would happen, right? So you assume our fix fails, and we think through why, and we rank the proposals and the impact and so on. And I'll talk a little bit about that on the next slide. Then we talk about 3 weeks in, you kind of convert those top ideas into time boxed experiments. And a lot of this, it probably seems very dense, but I promise you, this is the only way that, big or small, you are truly going to get the dividend out of failure. And I should mention this topic, learning from failure and preparation. I did a very short LinkedIn article, and I think Daryl or someone saw it and said, "Hey, come in and talk to us about that." So if you want a little bit more of a deep dive, very little bit more, there's a little article that you can look at. All right, so generate hypothesis. Then you commit to experiments. So we're in experimentation. You're going to convert your top ideas into experiments with a single owner, each person kind of looking at each individual piece, and have success metrics, right? And a review date. So make these SMART goals. And you want to log the results and the progress in a public tracker. So everyone on the team, we're all looking at what's happening and we're all following the progress so we can learn from these experiments together. And this leads us to the final two pieces, right? You want to publish what happened. So summarize what was the trigger, what was the root cause, how we experimented, and how we developed some early signals. We have internally what we call a wiki, a searchable wiki. And if your organization doesn't have one, I'd highly recommend. It's cheap. You can do it. It's basically an internal website where everyone can access, can create articles, and can talk and edit articles, and can talk about what went right and what went wrong. And we share, our wiki is probably more robust than Wikipedia, quite honestly, just on specifically tailored to our organization, right? And then the goal is to avoid future loss, and to educate new folks that are coming in, and to retain institutional knowledge, all of these things that we really care about. And then finally is closing the loop, right? So you're going to review the data again with the team that's responsible. If the metrics moved, you want to standardize whatever the new practice is, operationalize it into something that matters, right? Just like the broken hand crank taught Kettering, because he dissected it. Without that discipline, the lessons that we get from failure cannot truly be extracted. All right, I know I'm running up on time, so let me move to preparation. Preparation, if failure is backward looking and pays a dividend, which is really only one dividend, right? The learning, if you structure it correctly. Preparation, on the other hand, is forward looking, and it pays really two dividends in my view. So first, you're going to get loss minimization, right? I had a long fight with a friend who is it wasn't really a fight. He was totally dominating me logically. He's a PhD for NASA, a guy named James Stevenson, one of the smartest men that I know. We were roommates in college, and our debate was over whether or not minimizing loss is the same as maximizing gain. I'm not going to tell you where I fall on that, but I just want you to think about yourself, whether or not you believe in a particular situation or any situation, it is just as good to minimize the loss that you will incur as it is to maximize in a world where you're going to maximize gain, or in a world where you're going to lose. Is it just as good to minimize those losses? Well, anyways, the loss minimization is your first dividend, right? So the way that you gain this dividend out of preparation is through what we call a pre-mortem exercise. I mentioned that I would come back to this, and this comes from pioneering research by a guy named Gary Klein. And Gary, he cuts overconfidence. He demonstrates that you can cut overconfidence and certain hidden threats by doing a simple pre-mortem exercise. He looked at a bunch of different groups of professionals, so firefighting crews, surgical teams, corporate project groups, etc. And he field tested this pre-mortem protocol, and he asked the teams to imagine that their project had just failed, like in a spectacular way, and to list all of the plausible causes. He then reported the qualitative results of the exercise, and demonstrated through successive tests that the more teams engaged in this pre-mortem exercise, not only the better the outcomes, but the more potential for a successful result. In all cases, the teams that perform pre-mortems encountered less issues in accomplishing whatever the task is. So that's the first dividend. The second dividend really is you have the opportunity to engage in process refinement. So teams who imagine failure and they redesign plans, they can collectively raise the comprehension of the team, and they can reduce the blind spots that you see. And this research comes from a woman named Beth Vainant, and she did a controlled experiment in a lab, and she took 30 multidisciplinary teams, and they created this emergency response plan, and he rated their confidence in the plan. We've all done those kinds of table talk activities or those types of plans. Hey, what are we going to do in this emergency? Half of the teams performed a pre-mortem midway, and the control group did not. Post-task surveys and plan audits showed that the post-mortem teams gained significantly higher shared understanding and more confidence without inflating their optimism, right? And that supported the researchers' hypothesis, which was that process refinement technique improves effectiveness, especially under time pressure. And I can tell you, in the middle of the COVID pandemic, this was like the key for us to make sure, as we were encountering roadblocks in cross-border trade, for example, or cross-border transactions, because no one wanted airplanes from the United States flying into their countries, particularly if their countries had a low incidence of COVID infection. Now, as we all know, COVID circled the globe. It ultimately ended up not being as severe, but that was the initial reaction from the health scare, and the fear is what caused us to do many different types of pre and mid-mortem exercises. So we leverage preparation and we gain these two dividends through what I call the risk triad. And so here's the method. It's right there on the screen. Yeah, identify the potential pitfalls. You inoculate with countermeasures and decision triggers, right? So this is what we're going to do. And if this, then that. Make a map. And then you want to iterate through dry runs. Some people call them red teaming things, and write it down on a document. Keep a single source of truth so that everyone knows where's our playbook. One of the beautiful things that centenarian organizations can do is, if they're really good at keeping records, they can go back and pull playbooks. We certainly did it at UPS. UPS is 100 and something, 15, 16-year-old company. When a pandemic happened, we went back to the Spanish flu playbook. And just like Daryl, did, he went back 20 years and found an old picture of me. I can't even believe you still have a picture. But organizations that have really good record keeping, that it can form the basis for your preparation, right? So as I'm coming up on time, here's the call to action. So over the next 90 days, run a pre-mortem, right? Choose a live product or project. Imagine how it has failed. List 8 to 10 causes. Assign owners to neutralize the top 3. Okay. Log near miss wins. What do I mean by near miss wins? So publicly record decisions that averted a loss and celebrate them with the same kind of fanfare that you would usually reserve for hero rescues, right? So we always love saying, oh, this person parachuted into a problem and they completely turned it around. On our team at Meta, we really don't, you'll speak for my team. My team on Meta, we only really highlight, or I try to only highlight those people, well, how should I say this? I try to highlight those people who have averted escalations as much as those people who come into escalations and resolve them. I mean, no one wants to be in a C-level officer's room talking about how they're going to fix a problem. I mean, you may have some masochists that do that want to be glory seeking, but the real MVPs on your team are the ones who are avoiding those risks before they even happen. And then finally, teach this triad, right? So coach one mid-career colleague in the next 90 days. Coach one mid-career colleague on the triad, which is how to identify, inoculate, and iterate. 2025 is bringing lots of changes to us, right? AI's a thing. There's all this ethical scrutiny around technology deployments. There's social issues happening all around us. So it's important that we flag the biases that we have, that we're approaching, that we be clinical in the way that we're thinking about issues, that we're identifying failures, and we're trying to resolve them proactively, that we're leveraging preparation to the greatest extent possible. And the way I would look at it is, I would say, for you leaders in this room, that failure kind of maps the crater, and preparation refines the vehicle and the route. And we need both of those things in order to be successful. And those really great leaders are the ones who balance both. They balance both, and they build anti-fragile systems that can thrive under the volatility, because there's always going to be volatility coming at us, right? So, to Kettering, to the great namesake of this organization, who started this organization, to the 100 years of leadership that NMA has had, and in the next century, where failure will kind of map the potholes, but preparation will keep our wheels squarely on the road. I would say lock in to these two concepts, right? Because they've been carrying our organizations for generations. And with that, I will stop there. Let's see, it's 12:40. I'll open the floor if there are questions, and I would say that we can discuss anything generally or on this particular topic. I wouldn't say I've had a long career. It's long enough at this point to see things. And if you get the book that I wrote, you'll see that I start really in chapter 1 on systemic failure. And it actually starts with a fire and a house being burnt in my native Walterboro, South Carolina, and all of the conflagration of failures that result from it. And I'll just give you the punchline of the book. The punchline really is, organizations need more ethical leaders to survive the future of free enterprise. That there are many dangerous things on the horizons, dangerous concepts, dangerous ideas, dangerous people, and that it is only us as ethical leaders who are going to be the antidote to them. Thank you for having me, and I'll open the floor.
Great. So feel free to either unmute yourself or put a question in the chat. Just a reminder, hang out till we're done, because I've got 2 of Andrew's signed books to give away at the end of the webinar. So feel free with questions. There's a great question there. What is the difference between a risk analysis and developing mitigation strategies versus running a pre-mortem?
So risk, is that in the chat so I can?
It is in the chat, yes.
Okay, let me look here so I can make sure. What's the difference between a risk analysis and developing mitigation strategies? So a risk analysis is going to give you where we think the potholes are. This is our best guess of the topography of that we need to traverse. And a mitigation strategy, I would say, is a little deeper in that it's not just going to give you where we think all the risks are, but also the playbook. What do we do when we encounter those risks? So lawyers do risk analysis all the time, in which we're boiling the ocean. And I find those to be very unhelpful. My clients tend to think that they're unhelpful. No one wants to hear lawyers say that there are 100 or 1,000 different risks. Developing mitigation strategies, on the other hand, is saying we're going to tell you what the highest pieces of risks are, where we think the most important landmines are, and when and if we encounter them, here are going to be the ways that we're going to resolve them. So I just think that it might, some people might even say it's a semantic difference, because a good risk analysis should also encompass mitigation strategies. But I think technically there might be two, they might be distinct. Yeah, and the premortem is very much like a risk mitigation. I think that is a semantic difference. So if you are doing a mitigation strategy, a strategic view of risk mitigation, you are doing a premortem. Okay, I see here. Any thoughts on the adage of failing forward and how that dovetails or differs with your views on failure? Yeah, I think failing forward is, it suggests that you are getting all of the dividends from the failure, that you have developed the apparatus organizationally to capture learnings. And we say it all the time in our organizations, because we do have that. Where I think the risk is that there are some organizations that don't have the strategic setup to capture learnings, and they say fail forward as if failing forward is going to result in beneficial, outcomes in the future, but you can't get there unless you do the hard work first. And so in some cases that can be very dangerous for organizations to say fail forward when they're not equipped to do so. So there is a very rigorous process that you have to go through in order to get there. I look young. I appreciate you saying that. I have more gray now than I did in that photograph. Any other questions? Let's see. Have you been able to apply this to your personal? Oh, what a great question. I failed a lot. I failed a lot. I didn't even know I was going to be a lawyer. When I graduated from GW, I got my degree in economics and political science. It's focused on those two things. And I had a job lined up at the Bureau of Labor Statistics. I was in Washington, D.C. My thought was, I'm going to go and I'm going to be an economist. I was going to be an economist, which is really, the funny thing is, people who really just, well, I don't want to offend any economists on the call, but we're just sitting around looking at charts and making predictions based on what we think is going to happen. And then it was right around the time of the Great Recession. And like every other young person in college at the time, you decided, you had to figure out what to do. I'd start your own business or stay in school, and I opted for staying in school. And then successively had challenges there, right? So I wasn't necessarily equipped to be a great lawyer. So I did my first year back home at South Carolina, and then through resilience ended up being the top of the class there, and moved to Emory, and so just there are a lot of setbacks, and each time I've always tried to focus on kind of the things my grandmother and father have always told me, and that's to treat people right, to try again, and to never take defeats but never be defeated, and in many cases that's really a colloquial way, a folksy way of saying exactly what I've just described in 20 minutes in this whole process, right? It's one thing to say in a lab setting with all these beautiful words what my grandmother can say in one sentence, and that's encounter defeats, but don't be defeated. How do you do that? Well, through some of the things that I've just described here. Yes, interned at Coca-Cola in Atlanta. I'll tell you the biggest lesson I got from that is relationships will follow you through your life. So just like the NMA, 20 years ago, and doing that speech contest, I had no idea that it would lead me to today being here with you. I'm really, we just keeping those relationships are so important. Coca-Cola, when I was intern there, I met a legendary lawyer. Her name's Denise Fulmar. Rest her soul. She died in 2020. But she sent me to my first legal department at my first law firm out in Kansas City, Missouri, a firm called Shook, Hardy & Bacon. Legendary firm. Started like in the 1880s. And I started in the intellectual property group. I had only taken like 2 intellectual property classes my entire time in law school, and all of a sudden I ended up being in the patent group there, and that has made all the difference for me. So I owe Coca-Cola everything to the beginning of my career. And in fact, when I went to Shook, Hardy & Bacon, Coca-Cola, I went with a Coca-Cola case. It's Ethox Chemicals versus Coca-Cola, and that was a that really started my legal career. A personal question: what is the instrument called next to your saxophone? Oh, that is a handpan. This here, it's kind of like a steel drum, but it's just invert. It's I guess convex instead of concave. I think it's right. I was not really good in geometry, but it makes a more fulsome sound. I appreciate you saying that. I've always wanted to be really, really good at an instrument, and I've never succeeded in that goal. But be defeated, but take defeats, but don't be defeated, right? So I'll keep going. What's frequency videos? Okay, I think I answered that one.
Any other questions for Andrew? You have a fascinating career and clearly an aspiring musician too. So,
indeed. Well, thank you so much for letting me spend time with you all today, and I hope to stay connected to this great organization. Now that Daryl and I and Matt and I have connected, we'll definitely stay in touch.
Great. Andrew, thank you so much. We appreciate your time, and it's really cool, I think, for people to see someone who participated in our speech contest 20 years ago and to see the amazing success that you have in your career and we wish you the best with your baby this fall as well. So with that, I am going to share my screen and we're going to do a couple book giveaways here and we'll give you back a few minutes of your time. So can everyone see the wheel of names? Rashawn Lewis, are you on the call? If so, you have won a book. And if you will email me your address, I will be happy to ship that to you. I'm typing my email in the chat. So we've got one more. Kendall Murphy. Great. All right. With that, we will close out for today. Our next webinar will be August 17th. All right. I take that back. It's the third Thursday in August. I may be off on the date. But Larry Kishnick from our Fort Worth, Lockheed Martin Leadership Association of Fort Worth will talk to us about a presentation called Colors, and it's actually will be pretty fascinating, I think. So we hope you will join us then, and I'll be sending out a registration link for that here very early next week. So again, thank you, Andrew. Thank you again. We appreciate that and appreciate you coordinating how to get the signed books. And we will see you guys next month.